Hey, hopefully everyone's doing okay when this gets to you. Um, just a week before Christmas, and I thought I would follow up. It's been a fairly challenging week. This week just gone would have been my mother's 69th birthday this week gone, and I woke up, I was okay. The day before I was okay, but on the day I decided I was gonna do a little post, just in recognition slash remembrance. And as I was typing, it was just floods of tears. And again, it was just, so much, so much. I don't even know the words right now, but just so much, emotions going through my head. But I got through it, and thanks for all the support, shared all the love. One thing I am grateful for is that I've got good people around me. I've got, a family that knows me and have my back. But as I said, it's the week before Christmas, and equally I'm doing this video because I met someone yesterday. I want to say, yeah, I met someone yesterday who was sharing with me that they had recently lost their mother that they were caring for, and that they had actually buried their mom last week. And again, so much emotions, and I don't know, I just feel like I'm being guided, I'm being led to people who are going through this grief thing. So if you're out there and you're listening, you never know, just stick around, keep looking at the page. You never know, you may get something from it. But as I'm touching on it, I just want to shout out, you know my wife, mainly because of the book she done on grief, Love Remembers. And I'll plug that shortly because I want to touch on something that I was going through in the book that really is helping me. And one of it is around the four to five stages of grief. I believe it's five, 4 to 5. And it just had me reflecting a lot. One of them was denial, and even with denial, really, really could relate because years, I would say maybe up to 2 3 years after my mother had passed, I kept, and as I said, I keep reflecting on stuff. And I feel like, just on reflecting, I was reflecting on the fact that while my mother was, I knew she had passed, funeral, I was there throughout, like the funeral and all of that. I was just reflecting, like I would go places and I'd be like, see a group of people, and I would be wondering, or checking. I'd see someone that looked like my mother, and I'd almost make up still stories in my head, that my mother was probably alive, and I was just gonna have a day where she was just gonna pop up and say, surprise, it was just a prank, or whatever. And the next one of the other stages that he touches on, which is probably the one that I really want to spend the most time talking about this time around, is depression. Because that depression stage is really serious, and sometimes, oftentimes, we don't really see it, we don't recognize it, in the offset. And I don't know if this is linked to just Caribbean men, in particular. And I know grief affects everyone, but I found that, as I've said in previous videos, I felt like it was my job to just brush myself off and get on with it. Your mom's passed on, so what? Move on. But that wasn't the case. And when the depression really set in for me was, or would have been, when my nan passed. Because when my nan passed, I was more mature, I was older, and I would understand grief more. When my nan passed, I would have been, I want to say 29, 30. I was 29, 30, somewhere about. And that really hit me hard because we had a good relationship, but we never really had a lot of time to bond, because we hadn't really, I hadn't grown with my grandmother, so, or that grandmother, which was my father's mother. But I remember visiting her when she was in hospital, and when she was in hospital, she was in a state where she wasn't able to speak. So when I visited her, we could make eye contact. I would say what I'm saying, but she couldn't respond. And I can remember it still. Um, there was just this look that I remember getting from her, where she was just there lying in the bed on the hospital ward, and she was just looking at me and my family. And it's, when someone's looking at you and they want to say something, but they can't. And when we left hospital, I was really looking forward to going back to visit her, because I was hoping that when I went back to visit her, she would be, she'd be recovering. Because again, I didn't think my nan would have passed, because it was just, something sudden. She was taken into hospital. So I was really hoping that when I went back to visit, she would be, able to actually say whatever it is that she wanted to say. Because I felt like she wanted to say something. Her eyes were talking to me. And I remember the day she actually passed, I was getting ready to go to the hospital to visit her with my family, and the phone rang. And again, it was another cousin saying to me, it's no point because Nan's passed. And I was more, I would say I was more composed this time round. But even till today, I still can't get rid of that look. I can't get rid of her eyes, and I've made peace with it, but I still would have wanted her voice to say whatever it was she was going to say. And I felt like, and this is me, what I took away personally, that I believe, and again, maybe I'm naive, but I believe it probably was one of them things where she would have wanted to say to me, how much she was proud of me. She was probably wanting to tell me how well I had done, that validation that I believe we all seek sometimes, from those that we love, those that, we look up to. So that was just me. As I said, whether I'm right or wrong, that's another thing. But, that would have been the catalyst. Now, what would have even made it worse was actually going to the funeral. My nan died in the UK, Lewisham, London to be specific, and her wish was to be buried in Jamaica. And we took her back to Jamaica, the family, and I remember I went to the funeral. So went to the funeral, and one of the things I remember was the fact that this was my dad's mother. Now, my dad was there for me when I lost my mother, his late wife. And as painful as that would have been for him at the time, again, I didn't notice it. So for me, you know what, this man's been there for me through thick and thin. It's now my turn to be there for him. And I remember she died in November, and we brought her back to Jamaica and, buried her. And a couple of days after the funeral was my dad's birthday. And I remember, you know, just checking in on my dad, because, we were just focused on the funeral. And I was like, how are you doing, Dad? And I remember, I'll never forget, he said to me, we spoke, and she said, I'll see you December. But I never thought this is the way that, I'd be seeing her, would be to lay her to rest. And I could tell by what he said that he was struggling, and that hit me hard. This would have been, I believe, my first or second Christmas with my son, who was born then. My son would have been, yeah, I think it was my son's second Christmas, and I was really looking forward to getting back to the UK, to spend time with my family. And I realized that, it's my dad's birthday, and this was going to be a Christmas where potentially my dad would be spending on his own. And, and this is why I'm so grateful sometimes for, the person that I ended up marrying, my wife, because I phoned her up and I was like, look, you know what, I know this is going to be a hard one, but I need to spend Christmas with my dad. And, I know the kids are looking forward to me coming back and all of that, but, I've got to. And, honestly, she was such a blessing. She was like, yeah, go ahead. And I remember extending my ticket, and, we celebrated my dad's birthday. He had a really good time, tried to put you know, a light heart into a challenging situation. And I remember phoning work to say, look, saying to my then boss that, unfortunately, my dad isn't in the best place, and I'm gonna have to spend some more time with my dad. And my boss was okay with it, and I remember he sort of put me onto his support to say, make things happen. And the support was like, you can't have the time off. You've got to be back at work. And you know what? I remember waking up the morning. This would have been 2 or 3 days before Christmas, and I thought, I've got to do what I've got to do. This is my dad, at the end of the day. And I remember just saying to them, look, I understand the company perspective, the company policy, and all of that, but we'll have to deal with this when I get back into the UK. And I stayed with my dad, and I have no regrets. I'll do it all over again. But the depression set in when I came back to the UK, and I was driving. I think I was driving to the chemist, and I was driving to the chemist, and I had a scratch. I scratched my car, and I realized I wasn't all there. So I went to the doctors. The doctor signed me off work with stress, and went back to. So my wife, the kids are going to school. I'm at home by myself, and this is where the depression hit me, because I'm at home by myself, and I'm starting to get all these weird thoughts, just reflecting on my grandmother wanting to say something to me. What was it? And that then triggered me going back to my mother. And you know what? I remember days where I was in the house by myself. And whenever I talk to people, when I'm at work and, I get wind of someone going through loss and they're grieving, I always encourage them to be around people, because that 8-9 hours where I was by myself, I was pulling my hair out. I was like literally just going bonkers. I just felt like everything within me, I was going down some rabbit holes, just trying to figure things out, just asking all sorts of questions as to why this, why that, looking at my dad, what he's going through, why, all these different whys. And we'll never get the whys. And I touched on this in one of my previous videos, is that we've got to, or I encourage, we haven't got to do anything, but I encourage is to make the memories positive. Find positive in all the memories. As I said, at that time, I wasn't thinking that my grandmother would be saying to me, I'm proud of you, grandson. I was just trying to figure it out. And obviously, she's not there. I'm not going to get an answer. But my brain was just going in overdrive. And, it put me in a severe depression, to the point where, I'm calling up all different, trying to get counseling. I was trying to do a lot at the time. But because I wasn't in the right frame of mind, nothing was clicking. And like I said, I look at it now and I've made peace with it. I pushed away so many people. My kids would come home from school and they'd want to, try to cheer me up. My wife, all different people try different things, but I wasn't interested. On my previous video, I said that hurt people. And, the easiest thing to do is push people away, because, sometimes you even want to feel sorry for yourself. But, grief is real, as I said. And, if you're going through it, my encouragement is always to be around people. Don't think that numbing the pain by drinking or smoking is the answer, because once that wears off, once that high wears off, you're back at square one, and being around people helped and can help, because you can talk through your memories. You may cry, you will have someone to give you a hug, someone to just reassure you, remind you that it will be okay, because it's not easy. It isn't easy. And that period of time was really, really tough. And, I keep saying it. It's a few days before Christmas. I don't know when you're going to hear this. It could be a few days before someone's birthday. It could be a few days before anniversary. It could be anything. But grief is real. And I encourage you, if you're out there, depression is a real thing. There's a lot of people who play off, back in the days, there was no talk of depression. There's no talk of anxiety. I get that. But there was also people still committing suicide. There were still people that were doing things that, had they acknowledged that they're going through something, could have had the right treatment, whether it be, talking treatment or actually getting some sort of medication. So for me, my plea, my ask of every single one of you out there, if you look up, you'll see some of the quotes from my wife's book. I've also plugged, the Amazon link. Is an online. I actually have got a hard copy, and I've also got the electronic version, because, like I said, there's things in there that's helping me. As I said, the stages of grief, they're there. If you look at them, this isn't fiction, and I know it's easy for you, depending on your culture, depending on your upbringing, to just think, put that to one side. That's a joke. You know, even if you're a Christian, even if you're religious, the Bible says that Jesus wept. Do you know what I mean? If you read, I think it's the book of Kings, it talks about the prophet wanting to die. So people go through things, even if you're a religious person. Don't just think that, oh, this is all nonsense, because we have this thing where we over spiritualize things sometimes. I'm a believer, and I believe in that we are spiritual beings, but let's take practical steps to solving practical solutions. And one of the practical steps to take is to talk. Another one is to, actually acknowledge that you're going through something and seek help, because just trying to do this by yourself, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. It only works for a period of time, and then you realize that you've got to face up to it. Having faced up to the things I've spoken about, I didn't get to the state of depression where I had to take medication, because I had people around me that helped me to snap out of it. I went back to work, and that was the best thing I could have ever done, because I wasn't constantly just thinking about my grandmother, thinking about losing my mom, thinking about all these different things. What was it that she wanted to say? Oh, what if we had done this? Would she have passed? There were so many what ifs that we do have sometimes. But as I said, going back to work was a blessing. I was able to start interacting with people again. I was slowly able to get past certain things, and equally, I was able to accept that in my heart, in my mind, I am just settled that my nan would have been saying to me, I'm really proud of you. I never had the chance to tell you, but I am proud of you. And I hold on to that to this day. And this is another reason why I always give people their flowers when they're alive. My friends that I get the opportunity, when we talk, I tell them how much I respect them, how much they have done for me. I openly say thank you, because when they're dead and gone, they'll never know. My dad always says this. He says, give me my flowers when I'm alive, because when I'm not there, I won't hear them. So I tell my dad how much I love him. I make him know that, what he means to me, because when they're gone, you can't tell them that. So for me, as I said, depression is one of the things that I see people go through, and it is crippling. People actually lose their mind through even this thing called grief. There are people out there that have lost their mind. So don't let your grief take you to that stage. Please, my plea, my ask is that you just try and take time to, you know, go through the phases. As I've said, I've plugged them. Go through the stages. You'll deny it for a while, but the best thing you can do is come to the acceptance stage, where you accept that the person's gone. How do I then move on? When I accepted that my mother had passed, I then learned to make use her memories as positive memories. I shared in another video that my daughter's middle name is my mother's name, because that was my way of, in a sense, causing my mother to live on. My son is the same thing. My son's middle name is my dad's name, which is my name. I wanted to give him the name again, but I gave him the middle name because that's my way of making them live on. My nan, I remember the things she tells me, and that lives on. So depression, especially in this Christmas period, you're spending Christmas alone for the first time. And even if it's not the first time, it still can be a tough time for some people. So it is real, but as I've said, seek help, whether it be a medical practitioner, a counselor. Equally, as I've said, I've plugged the book. So please take your time, read the book. You know, there'll be different sections. There are sections that I spend more time on than others because it is what works for you and the aspect of it that, you know, you find will bring you that comfort and help you to unpack your grief. Clyde signing out again. Hope you find it useful. If it didn't help you, send it to someone who you think it might help. Have a good one. Until next time, stay blessed.